Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, in a sort of follow-up from the CSGO system requirements build the other day, I've put together another PC, this time based on Red Dead Redemption 2's recommended system requirements. Now, interestingly, I didn't have to change too much about my own personal rig in order to get all the components that I needed for this build, so it gives me a good chance to talk about my personal components too, and considering I've had quite a long time with them, I can discuss in a little bit of detail what I think of each individual component and whether or not I would recommend purchasing them. So it's never a good idea to build a system tailored to one specific game, but I do find it quite fun, and of course we will be seeing how other games perform as well. So the thing about this build is that there is one primary component that I wouldn't recommend about it in early 2020, or from this point onward to be honest, but we'll talk about that a little later on in the video. So if you're new here, the idea of this series is to build a PC tailored to a specific game's recommended or minimum system requirements, those requirements that you find on the Steam page or the respective store page for certain titles. We then see how the games perform with said minimum or recommended requirements and see how well other games run as well. Lately I've been finding it to make more sense putting a game title in the video title rather than putting a certain amount of money, because these parts and therefore the total system cost may vary depending on where you live. But let's get into it and see if Red Dead Redemption 2's recommended system requirements can actually play the game smoothly. Released last November for the PC, Red Dead Redemption 2 didn't have the smoothest of PC launches, but despite this I quickly forgave Rockstar for any launcher issues and crashes I once had once I saw how good this game looked. As suggested by the developers, the minimum requirements include an i5-2500K or FX 6300, 8GB of RAM and a GTX 770 or R9 280. The recommended specs include an i7-4770K, 12GB of RAM and a 6GB GTX 1060 or RX 480, the 4GB version of the card. My system consists of the following. First, we have a Seasonic Focus Plus Gold 550W PSU. This is the best power supply I think I've ever used, to be honest. I got it for an open box marked down price due to the lack of cellophane packaging around the cardboard. I paid about £40 instead of £75. It's completely silent, fully modular and well reviewed. We also have an ASRock B450M HDV, a basic AM4 board, but one that's perfect for anyone looking to get into AMD's latest platform without spending too much. Atop the board we have 16 gigs of 3200MHz Corsair LPX. This is actually 3000MHz RAM, but it's clocked at 3200 in the BIOS. 12 gigs is the recommended amount, but that just makes no sense. You shouldn't be pairing an 8GB module with a 4GB one. So the liquid cooler is a story for another day, but underneath that we have the Ryzen 5 1500X. With 4 cores and 8 threads, it's still pretty capable, but to be honest, I can't really recommend it. You'll hear a lot of that in this video. Reason being is that used prices, at least here in the UK, are simply too high, and a Ryzen 5 1600, the newer AF model, can be found for less brand new, and it will perform better. You've probably also noticed that the graphics card isn't a 480 or a 1060. It was during initial testing, and we'll have the results from that very shortly, but just like the Ryzen 5 1500X, used prices are silly, and you can't find them in many places new. The same goes for the 480. Finally, the case I'm using is a Cooler Master Masterbox Q300L. I'm not a huge fan of it, to be honest. I like the compactness of it, but I don't like the way the power supply sits away from the back of the case. Moving on, and I currently use this 1TB SSD. It looks a little bit like the Assassin's Creed logo is printed on the back here. I paid about £80 on Amazon, which made it the cheapest 1TB SSD at the time, and it was intended as a replacement for a friend's laptop, but I ended up using a Samsung one instead. It's called an Aseno SSD, and it's actually very well rated on Amazon. It's about £85 now. Okay, so you may remember we've tested the 1060 on the channel a few times, mainly the 3GB version, but the 6GB version is definitely the better bet these days, and I'm glad this is the recommended card as opposed to the lower VRAM model, which also does feature less CUDA cores. So I've been doing a little bit of testing over the past couple of days, and I found that if you jump into Red Dead Redemption 2 with these specs, set everything to high at 1080p, you can expect around 39 frames per second with a 1% low of 31 and a 0.1% low of 23. However, using optimal settings, which is basically a mixture of everything, I was able to achieve 50 frames per second on average, with a 1% low of 41 and a 0.1% low of 31. Now this is combined with some outdoor gameplay, some indoor gameplay, and the in-game benchmark as well. What I did here was follow the guide from Digital Foundry, and I also watched a hardware unboxed video talking about certain settings that impact performance. This was an optimal settings video for the game itself. I'll link both of those in the description because they're definitely worth a watch. But yeah, on the Ryzen 1500X, 4 cores, 8 threads, a GTX 1060 6GB card, you can achieve around 50 frames per second if you want to retain similar visual quality to the current consoles or the PlayStation 4. You won't be running it in 4K like the Xbox One X, but I still think that this is pretty solid. So Red Dead 2 will run on this setup fairly well, just don't go trying to max out the game, and be sure to follow a few guides that discuss which settings are best reduced or turned off to maintain a smooth frame rate. The next thing I want to talk to you about are the RX 480 and GTX 1060. If you can find one on the used market for a reasonable price, then so be it. But lately, I've seen prices of both the 4GB 480 and 6GB 1060 skyrocket on sites like eBay, not to mention that they are quite scarce. The Ryzen 5 1500X also seems to be a little harder to find and overpriced. However, just like the two GPUs, if you can find one for what is, in your country, a good price, then it may be worth it. But let's talk about what I'd suggest instead if you want to put together a build in mid-2020. Firstly, the graphics card. It was probably obvious, but either the 1650 Super or RX 5500 XT would be ideal for those of you on a tighter budget who would like to play games at 1080p with respectable settings and close to 60 FPS should you adjust the settings accordingly. I have a comparison video on both of these cards, both of which are better than a 1060 or 480. Again, there will be a link below. The 1650 Super makes a little more sense as it is a bit cheaper, and from what I've seen there are more models available at a lower price point. Here in the UK they're around £150, which seems to be around about the same or a little bit less than I've seen a lot of used 1060s or 480s go for lately, which is just silly. Of course, depending on when you are watching this video, my opinion on whether or not you should look for a used 1060 or 480 may be different, so just keep your eye on the used market. Now, as for the processor, whilst I found that the Ryzen 5 1500X is still a very capable chip, I mean it still has 4 cores and 8 threads after all, what I would recommend in 2020 is one of these. The Ryzen 5 1600. Now this is the newer AF model. The way you can tell is that on the code, on the box, it will say all the usual letters followed by AF box as the last 5 digits instead of AE box. Now you can either ask online retailers whether or not their stock says this on it, in which case you'll have a new one, or you can ask them to see whether it has AE on it, which would mean that it's an old one. Either way, both are good, but the older model may be a little harder to find. The AF model is in stock at a lot of places here, so it's definitely worth seeing whether or not you can find one of those. Having said that, I was made aware that the Ryzen 5 1500X was floating around on Amazon a couple of weeks ago for about $70 in the US, so it may be worth going in search of one of those. But for a little bit more, the Ryzen 5 1600 may be the better bet. Those 6 cores and 12 threads guarantee that you should be able to play all of your favourite games with ease when paired with a decent graphics card. Even in pairing with a 5500 XT or 1650 Super, you'll have a fantastic time. All that's left to say then is, yes, you can play Red Dead Redemption 2 with the recommended system requirements, although the components suggested I wouldn't recommend any more. Usually I just put the components in a system together, see how well they run the intended game and be done with it, but I wanted to expand on that in this video a little bit more with some of my personal recommendations, just in case any of you out there do want to put together a PC right now. Hopefully this has helped you be aware of what to look out for, processor and graphics card wise, and I hope if you are intending on building a PC right now, you can find everything you need at a good price. But yeah, the Ryzen 5 1600 and RX 5500 XT or 1650 Super would make a pretty good all-rounder in my opinion, and you'd still have somewhere to go in terms of upgrading the GPU, which would need upgrading before the processor. I have a feeling these Ryzens are going to be good for years to come. But thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it down below, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.